campaign?
Well, I think the short answer is that Mr. Anderson and his people underestimated severely the cost of the campaign, the cost both in terms of money and time and just devotion of interest to getting on the ballot. They underestimated the amount of money they'd need for a credible television campaign, and they overestimated, critically, the amount of money that they could raise through direct mail, the amount of money they could get through bank loans, which turned out to be nothing. And I think very critically, they overestimated the amount of media time they could get after a while, considering their position in the polls, and how that media attention might be used to establish Mr. Anderson as a serious, substantial alternative to the two major party candidates.
Well, 6 months ago, people were saying John Anderson was crazy to be running as a Republican, and lately they've been saying he's crazy to be running as an independent. What does that say to you about 1980?
It says to me that there's some people, of course, who plainly believe he's crazy whatever he does, which I think is probably unfair. The ideological differences were there. Mr. Anderson was not particularly at home in that Republican Party which nominated Ronald Reagan. And I think there are clear differences that he tried to establish between himself and the President and Mr. Reagan on things like military policy, his opposition to the MX missile, on domestic policy, his really greater willingness to use the powers of government to reindustrialize the northern industrial and midwestern states. But I guess what must be the biggest disappointment to him is that he was never able to make any of his issues those issues which turned the campaign. He was never able to establish himself as riding the crest of an issue and forcing the President or Mr. Reagan to respond to it.
You've been with those folks for the last few days. What, in an honest moment, do they tell you is the impact they will have tomorrow?
An honest moment, they say they'll stand up for some principles. They just might win Connecticut, and they'll have had a good time and learned a lot.
Well, learned a lot. Do you think they will go on from here, or is this the last hurrah for John Anderson?
You know, I really can't answer that. I think he's been increasingly candid with at least some local interviewers in the campaign over the past few weeks that he might want to continue as a politically active independent, possibly even as a candidate for president or found a new party. And I really don't know about that. I think he'll make an attempt to be active in public life. If he makes an attempt to form a new party and continue that sort of candidacy for the president, I think he'll run into an organizational problem, which is that a great many of the people who joined him this time out were Kennedy Democrats. And 4 years from now, they might prefer to begin again in the Democratic Party and only join an independent effort if it seems called for at the moment. But I don't think, to answer the question in a more general way, we've seen the last of independent candidacies launched from what's really broadly accepted as the mainstream of American political thought.
Senator Wertheimer, if you could identify the one factor that's been the most crucial to Reagan in this alleged surge that he's been experiencing in the last few days, what would it be?
It would be the debate in Cleveland, and before the debate in Cleveland, it would be the debate in Chicago, or the debate in Manchester, or the debate in Nashua, New Hampshire.
Why?
Governor Reagan had one very serious problem when he started out. That was his age, and his perceived conservatism, and the ability of the Carter campaign, which has gone up and down during the course of the year, to make Ronald Reagan the issue. They succeeded to a great extent in the beginning of the fall, as Cokie said, when the war and peace issue began to be in the front of everybody's minds with the Iran-Iraq war. President Carter talking about Governor Reagan as being untrustworthy, a person who we could not trust to conduct foreign policy in a restrained and rational way. But when Governor Reagan stood before us for 90 minutes in Cleveland with President Carter leading him through his paces, he did not seem to be the sort of person that President Carter was painting him to be. The president was using war words, scary words, words like belligerent, and applying them to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was standing there, big, tall, good-looking man, obviously at ease in the situation, occasionally making a joke, while the president was much more tense and intense. And Ronald Reagan gave us the appearance of a man who was different from the man that Jimmy Carter had been describing.
The triumph of personality over propaganda, or personality as propaganda?
Well, it also is an interesting phenomenon that we are able as citizens to see somebody for a long stretch of time in those debates. And millions of us watch them on television. And so we do get a good view of the candidate, a personal, our own view of the candidate. We can make up our own minds about him. And I think that it is interesting that a great many people do make up their minds sort of from their bellies, and not so much from what they hear, but from what they feel about the person that they see.
Well, Cokie, you've been out there watching those bellies. What effect did the debate have on the voters' perception of both Reagan and Carter?
Well, I couldn't agree with Linda more. I saw the debate and thought that it was pretty much of a draw, and then I got a plane early the next morning into a blue-collar neighborhood in Pittsburgh, and one person after another said to me, I'm not scared of Ronald Reagan anymore. I was a little nervous about him. I was afraid he was a warmonger, but he's not a warmonger. He's not a scary man. They also worried a little bit about whether he had it to be president, but he stood on the same stage with the president for 90 minutes, so he could be president as well as anybody.
Does it perturb?
And he's not too old.
What's that, Linda?
Being
That's
too
right.
old was a question as well, and there he stood for 90 minutes, and nothing to indicate that he will be 70 when he is sworn in if he's elected. Nothing to worry about in the age issue there. So that laid two things to rest, and all of a sudden Jimmy Carter could no longer make Ronald Reagan the issue, and Ronald Reagan could travel the country as he's been doing this week, asking this bottom line question: are you better off financially? Is the country better off economically? Is the nation more secure than it was 4 years ago? And the crowd just roars, no, no, no.
Scott, what does it say to you, Scott, that a single performance can have that kind of impact on this presidential election?
Well, it's distressing, of course, when you view a number of candidates running that have records stretching back for a time, and you should be able to judge them according to that. I want to express, I guess, what amounts to a contrary viewpoint, at least from the perspective I've had covering the Anderson campaign, which is that it might be that we've come to expect debates in American politics, and I think we might be reaching the point where debates really won't have the impact that they had back in 1960, for example. I think they certainly have an impact on a certain core group that's watching them and is as willing as undecided voters to go one way or another. But I think mostly they serve to reconfirm a judgment that's been reached before, and an audience sort of tailors their reactions to whoever they're working for. I think they're at the point of becoming a little bit more like sporting events where you root for somebody decidedly than they are deliberate contests for public opinion.
Scott,
my impression has been that people looked at the debate thinking, I'm not sure that I want to vote for Jimmy Carter, but can I vote for Ronald Reagan?
Everybody's talking about what a poor choice we have tomorrow. And in these last 2 minutes, I'd like to know what your response is on the road to that lament. Scott?
Well, I try not to get into conversations like that, but I think as long as I can remember in American politics, people have been complaining about the poor choices, and I don't say that to excuse them. I think there's definitely been a narrowing of aspiration, a narrowing of what Americans seem to want from an elected public official, and that might just be a realistic judgment in a country like this. On the other hand, there does seem to be a process that excludes people from running, from entering serious contests because they're considered, maybe a little bit ridiculous for trying to reach against the grain. And I think that might be bad in a time where we're reviling people for not participating in the process. At the same time, if we tell them they can only compete if they're going to be serious about it and tailor their viewpoints to conform to what's perceived to be public opinion.
Cokie?
Well, this whole business of not liking the choices is true, and a lot of that comes from the coverage of the candidates. People, they all have feet of clay, and people see all of their weak points, no question about it. But one interesting fact, Bill, is that we participate more than any other democracy in the nomination of our political candidates and less than most in the actual selection in the general election. And I think those two facts might have something to do with each other. I think that with our new nominating process that we get people who don't necessarily appeal to the broad spectrum of voters. So that tomorrow we can only expect about half of the people who are eligible to actually come to the polls.
Thank you all three, Linda Wertheimer, Scott Simon, and Cokie Roberts from National Public Radio.
Bill Moyers' Journal. We'll be back after this message.
Queridos amigos, les habla la esposa del senador John F. Kennedy, candidato a la presidencia de los Estados Unidos. En estos tiempos de tanto peligro, cuando la paz mundial se ve amenazada por el comunismo, es necesario tener en la Casa Blanca un líder capaz de guiar nuestros destinos con una mano firme. Mi esposo siempre vigilará los intereses de todos los sectores de nuestra sociedad que necesitan la protección de un gobierno humanitario para el futuro de nuestros niños y para lograr un mundo donde exista la paz verdadera. Voten ustedes por el Partido Demócrata el día 8 de noviembre. Que viva Kennedy.
There's not just one election tomorrow. There are hundreds. So many things to do with your vote beyond electing a president. For one thing, there's a Congress to choose with dozens of interesting races and strong challenges to some key leaders in both houses. There are 34 Senate seats at stake tomorrow, 24 of them now held by Democrats. The Republicans would have to take 9 seats to become the majority. And in the House, Republicans need to win 59 seats to get control. It's expected the Republican ranks will increase in this election, and the new Congress is almost certain to be more conservative. The point is, when you vote tomorrow, think Congress. If Congress is America's longest-running morality play, as I think it is, Tuesday's election will thicken the plot.
And you, the members of this body, are the ones that will decide my fate. As you go to that voting machine to put your cards in, keep in mind, use a comparison when you hit the button. When you vote to expel, it will have the same effect as hitting the button if I was strapped in an electric chair in this well.
Will Philadelphia's Michael Ozzie Moyers of Abscam fame win his fight to represent the cradle of liberty for yet a third term and maybe another $50,000?
In addition to alcoholism, I have also suffered from homosexual tendencies, although I do not consider myself to be a homosexual.
Will Robert Bowman, the darling of conservatives, return to the House and resume his crusade for right-wing morals?
And we can have the strength, once again, as we had under Eisenhower and Dulles, to let the world know that we're not going to stand for being pushed around.
In this year of resurgent conservatism, will the father of it all be around to celebrate? He's in a tough fight with a Democrat who says the grand old man of the right is too far gone.
Well, 28 years ago, Barry was a younger, hard-working senator. Now, it's just impossible for one man's stamina to span 30 years when the problems of the country continue to rise and the demands of the job continue to rise.
But age has caught up with the Republican left as well.
Hey, I see you're wearing a Javits button.
Yeah, he's my candidate.
Are you kidding? He'll be 82 if he finishes his term, and he voted with Jimmy Carter 82% of the time.
I've been suffering for some time from a muscle disease that affects only my walking. But in no way does it affect my brain, my reasoning, and my ability to do my job as senator.
Jacob Javits is running as a third-party candidate after having been beaten in the primary by a frenetic local politician named Alphonse D'Amato, whose right-wing rhetoric, plus his mother's endorsement,
I hope you'll vote for him so he can...
may beat Javits and Liberal Democrat Elizabeth Holtzman.
I just want to say how proud I am to be able to help break open the political process. And I think it shows the political process is open to women, it's open to young people, it's open to independent people, it's open to people of conscience.
But the big story in congressional politics this year is the all-out battle Republicans are waging to end 25 years of Democratic control. Jim Wright of Texas, 26 years in the House, majority leader since 1977, is in trouble, charged with voting less like a Southern Democrat and more like an Eastern liberal.
I think the truth is that I am probably the most moderate, not to say conservative. I'm not an arch-conservative. I don't pose as that, but the most nearly conservative member of the House who would have any chance to be the majority leader.
John Bradamus of Indiana, the Democratic whip, fighting for his political life, a target for voters unhappy with unemployment in South Bend and the economy in general.
On the one hand, as majority whip, you're likely to get blamed for everything that goes wrong, but I have little control over OPEC, Japanese auto manufacturers, of the Ayatollah Khomeini.
Morris Udall of Arizona.
If you're an incumbent, your record's fair game and should be looked at.
Chairman of the House Interior Committee, something of a hero to environmentalists for his stand against strip mining and for preserving Alaska. Forced now to answer, what have you done for Arizona lately?
For the past 30 years, our water has been diverted to Southern California, and Mo Udall hasn't stopped it. If Tucson is going to get the water it needs, we'll need a congressman President Reagan can work with.
I'm Richard Huff.
Just about every right-wing group in America wants to unseat Frank Church of Idaho, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. If he survives, it will be because he persuades conservative Idaho that stature in Washington can sell spuds to the world.
Idaho is my special responsibility. And since January, I have been instrumental in securing the purchase of lentils by Egypt and of dried peas for distribution to refugees in Thailand and in Somalia and in Pakistan, and the sale of grain to Taiwan.
Senator John Culver of Iowa, small-town boy, Harvard-trained, one of the most liberal members of the Senate. The right is after him, too, but he isn't budging an inch.
I believe when the push comes to shove that Iowa's elderly poor ought to be getting help, and the last people that need it are the oil companies that already are making unconscionable profits.
And down in Texas, the oil companies are out to defeat a man they couldn't buy.
Wait till you see each one of these special interests come in.
Bob Eckhart of Houston, the most liberal member of the Texas delegation and the toughest.
Big money boys can't scam me. They don't own me. They can't buy me. I'm going to go right on fighting the big boys and protecting the people against gouging and rip-offs. That's my job.
If you looked at the television commercials being used in congressional races around the country, as we've done, you'd be appalled, I think, at how negative and vacuous so many of the campaigns have been. And you'd wonder at a people who plead for politicians to lead on the broad national issues and then punish them with defeat if indeed they rise above parochial concerns. Even so, and sadly, as Bob Eckhart suggested, we never really get the Congress we voted for as much as our special interests get the Congress they've paid for. Votes get counted, but it's money that counts. Pay attention, too, if your state is one of the 13 that will choose a governor tomorrow or one of 42 electing state legislatures. Those elections could decide the shape of politics to come because the House of Representatives will be reapportioned next year, and it takes both branches of a legislature and the signature of a governor to approve new congressional boundaries. And then there are the people who take exception to the system of government once removed from the governed. They want to vote on some issues directly, not through representatives swayed by lobbyists. It's called a citizens' initiative, and in 23 states tomorrow, the swish you hear around the polling booth will be the rustling of grassroots. In Oregon, they'll be deciding whether animals can be caught in leg-hold animal traps. In the District of Columbia, the issue is a constitutional convention with the possibility of statehood for the federal city. Out in Montana, it's litter control and a recycling law. And the mourning dove's future is at stake in South Dakota. While in Minnesota, the issue is the initiative itself. Should voters in the future have the right to propose and place their own concerns on the ballot? All of the initiatives to be decided tomorrow are essentially local, tailored by the people who live in that state according to their own needs. But if all are homegrown, many reflect national concerns. Following the lead set by California's Proposition 13, citizens in 8 states are proposing drastic cuts in property tax. While Washington seems determined to expand the use of nuclear power, citizens in states most affected are taking matters in their own hands. Despite the defeat of one nuclear initiative in Maine, folks in Oregon and South Dakota are asking for a public vote before each new nuclear power facility can be built. There are citizens in Missouri and Montana who want strict controls on radioactive waste dumping. And in Washington and South Dakota, initiatives would control the transportation of radioactive materials within the states. For all you apathy mongers who shake your heads over the declining participation in voting for national elections, take heart. When citizens' initiatives are on the ballot, the turnout increases by 20%, suggesting perhaps that the more people feel they can make a difference and see the difference, the greater the difference they make.
Bill Moyers' Journal. We'll be back after this message.
I feel that I have had, well, if I didn't feel that I had had experience that qualifies me
to seek this job, I wouldn't do it. Now, mine was not in politics. You wanted law and order in this town. You've got it. I'll shoot the first man who starts for those steps. And here's exciting new Baraxo waterless hand cleaner. Watch. New Baraxo waterless hand cleaner removes the toughest dirt or stains. Gets hands clean and smooth fast, anytime. What a convenience. That's new Baraxo waterless hand cleaner. I see beyond this joint, right through the dirty wallpaper.
Ronald Reagan as the tight-lipped soldier of fortune whose past was a mystery.
Over the years, Ronald Reagan has played many roles. This year, he wants to play governor. Are you willing to pay the price of admission?
I'm afraid that Carter is too ambiguous.
Carter's is not quite sure which direction he goes. He changes his mind on his stand every other day or so. He contradicts himself from one day to another.
Well, he's changed his opinions from one day to the next.
He's much too wishy-washy.
He's very, very wishy-washy.
He seems to be a little wishy-washy.
If he would stand up and say what he's for, he'd be a little bit easier to understand and maybe to believe.
All the things we've read about Jimmy Carter, I think, are true, that he is fuzzy on a lot of the issues, and I like President Ford, a man who will tell you just exactly where he does stand.
How would you feel when you vote tomorrow if you knew that you were not only expected to choose a president, but to carry on an historical legacy? Well, you'd feel the way the voters do in Palo Alto County, Iowa. Since 1896, when they helped to send William McKinley to the White House, the farmers and townsfolk there have always voted for the winning presidential candidate. Jimmy Carter won 55% of their votes 4 years ago, but they're still angry that he embargoed grain sales to Russia after promising them in 1976 he'd never do a thing like that. Record grain prices and a bumper harvest make them feel a little better about things nowadays, but it's still a tough and close fight in Palo Alto County this year, as we discovered on a visit there.
Well, you're just 30 seconds away from our opportunity to find out just how people in Emmitsburg and Palo Alto County feel about their presidential preference. That's coming up in 30 seconds here on KEMB. We are in the process of polling people of Palo Alto County to find out if they can tell us who they think will be the next president. Let's introduce the guests that we have in the studio. We have representing the Democrats, Mr. Boyd Griffith, and representing the Republican side, Mr. Ed Norland. Gentlemen, welcome to the studio today. Boyd, let's start with you. Do you feel that there's a lack of interest in the general election here?
I very definitely feel there's a lack of interest, and I think that people who voted for Carter originally feel a reluctance to come out and strongly endorse him. It'll take going into the voting booth before some of them will make their final decisions.
Well, I should mention that we do have our first votes up there. We've apparently received 4 votes so far, and all 4 have been for Ronald Reagan. So we have Anderson 0, Jimmy Carter 0, and Ronald Reagan 100% right now. If you don't like the way that looks, then give us a call. We'd like to find out how you feel about the presidential candidate.
The way it looks right now, I'll probably stick with Carter. He has brought the farm program back here towards the last 3 months, brought prices up for the farmers. That's what I'm looking at right now.
Are you happy with that choice?
Not really.
Why?
I can't see really Carter or Reagan myself.
I'm undecided. One day I think Carter and the next day Reagan. As a man, I really like Reagan. I've been a radio fan of his since the 1930s when he was on WHO Des Moines. I think he's a sincere man. I think Carter is too. Haven't completely made up my mind. Well, it'll be Carter or Reagan. And I hope I vote for the guy that wins.
During this last spring, I had never seen a time in the 20 years I've been in the banking business that farmers have been under the pressure they have this last year. I think part of it is due to the Carter administration. And so I'll probably vote for Ronald Reagan because I look at it as a change, and I hope a positive change for my farmer customers.
I'm going to stay with Carter. I think the last few weeks, especially the grain going up, I think it's going to convert a lot of these farmers back to Carter. I'm sure they will. I'm sure it will.
Reagan, because I'm just not thrilled with Carter, what he's been doing.
What specifically?
Well, I'm a farmer's wife, and it hasn't been too good till just the last few months.
And Reagan will be good for the farmers?
Well, I don't know, but I don't know if he could be any worse than Carter.
Right now it's 11 votes for Carter, 11 for Reagan, 50-50, and we have yet to have a vote cast for John Anderson, which I think is very interesting. Someone on line 2 wants to talk to us on the air, okay? We'll find out who we have here. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to put 2 votes in for President Carter, mine and my husband.
Tell us why are you doing that?
Okay, because I think he's got a hard job. I agree with the way he's doing it. I think we're all going to have to work together in the United States in order to pull it through.
Okay, fine. Listen, thank you so much for calling.
Thank you.
Bye now. 852-4551. That's our number. All 3 lines are open if you'd like to give us a call. We have votes coming in very quickly here. Ronald Reagan has taken the lead. He now has a total of 50.88% of all the votes in. Carter has 43.
I think I'll probably vote for Reagan because I don't really think that I can afford Carter for another term. Inflation has been so high and the economy's been so poor. I don't know that Reagan will do I don't know for sure that he'll do better, but I know that, you know, we've seen what Carter can do. And I know that it's cost me too much to live.
I can't say I really like what Carter has done the past year, but I'm a little scared of Reagan because of his age, and I just don't know what I want to do yet.
I'm going to vote for Anderson. Why? Well, because I don't want to vote for Reagan. I don't want to vote for Carter. So I'm going to vote for Anderson. I usually vote. That's the reason.
I think I'm going to vote for Reagan. I'm a registered Republican. I think Reagan comes from the Midwest. Maybe he can understand our problems out here a little bit more.
I'm definitely for Ronald Reagan. We need something for a change rather than what we've had the last 4 years. I think Reagan is a fellow that can get a few of these things in fulfillment. I think he's not going to he's going to say what he wants to do, and he's going to get a good administration behind him.
First he said he was against aid to New York City. He was against bailing out New York City. So then when he went to New York City and talked to the people in New York City, he decided that maybe he was for that. I'm just really not very pleased with the candidates. I'm not pleased with Carter either. I think he's got real good vision as to what's ahead for the country and for the world. And I think that that's really important because I think we have to think in terms of global policies rather than just national policies now. And I think Mr. Reagan is very nationalistic. I think he thinks in terms of America and America the superpower, and I think those days are past.
I'm for Reagan. I feel that we are definitely in need of a change. Even though Carter has had a Democratic Congress, he has not been able to get through legislation that he has advocated.
I think that's one of his biggest faults.
We are now tied at 37 votes for both Carter and Reagan. And that comes to 48.5% for each of them and 3.9% for John Anderson. He's received 3 votes all the time since we've been on the air. Okay, we have somebody on the line here we'd like to talk to now, and could I have your name, please? Okay, Fred, tell us how you feel.
I support President Carter. I think he's about as good as we got. I think today the farmers never have had it better.
Okay, well, Fred, thanks so much for calling in and expressing your opinion.
You bet.
Okay, bye now. If you would like to be on the air, please call us. Let's get those votes in, and it looks as if we are going to have a very, very close contest, just as you guys predicted before we started. Any comments?
I anticipated it being real close, and just out of curiosity, I would love to know how many farm people called in. They're real busy during the harvest. The harvest season.
You know, that might make a difference.
If we've had much of a farm response, really, in our call-in program.
852-4551. That's our number. All 3 lines are open if you'd like to give us a call.
Right now, I'm leaning toward Reagan. I'm just dissatisfied with Carter. I think inflation has hurt us tremendous. You know, I think when Carter went in, it was around 7-8%, and it was up to 18% here at one time. The high interest rates, too, has hurt us. It's just common, not only, probably only thing worse than high interest rates, and that's not no money available. That's even worse, you know, when it comes time to put our crop in. We can't borrow any money at all. Reagan's maybe more middle of the road type of politics that I'm interested in than possibly what even Carter is. You know.
have someone else on the line here we want to talk to. Right now we've got 45 for Carter and 44 for Reagan. Kerm, just how do you feel?
Well, I wanted to go for Carter because I didn't want Reagan up that one vote. He was one vote ahead a minute ago. And Reagan was ahead, wasn't he? Just a little bit a while ago.
Yes, he was, Kerm. He was ahead a moment ago, and we're getting some changes in now. Let's see. We're adding 3 votes for Carter and 3 votes for Reagan, and Carter is ahead by 1 vote right now.
Well, that's just okay. That's just the way I feel about it. I want him to win by 1 at least.
I talk to a lot of people that are Democrats. They may still vote Democratically, and yet a lot of their thoughts are the same as mine. It's strange. It really is that you can have somebody that, you know, is a fairly conservative Republican and somebody that you think is a fairly liberal Democrat, and yet there are so many things that we agree on. And we can't find someone to vote for that'll do these things. And that's, I guess, what's discouraging all of us. Maybe it's so in the whole country. I really don't know.
I get a vote, that makes me feel, you know, kind of important. I wish there was different choices for my, you know, for our first time that we get a vote. I wish we could think that we voted for the right guy.
Probably Jimmy Carter, because he's kept us out of war so far, and I don't know, I don't want to take chances on a new guy right now.
Well, I think we need a change of pace from Carter. I think he's, some of his plans put a couple people out of business when it really didn't need it. And I think a change of pace will be good for the country.
I'm sort of undecided right now, but I've been going toward Reagan's side because I don't think Carter's really been doing the job that we expected him to be doing.
I'll be voting for President Carter because I think he's a real level-headed guy, and he's kept calm through his 4 years. You know, he's had a lot of crises come up, and he's handled them well. You know, he's kept us out of war.
I'm so undecided as yet because I really don't like any of the candidates. Reagan, I just don't trust him for some reason. And Carter, I don't like the way he's handled things the past 4 years.
We now have a tie. Jimmy Carter, 52 votes. Ronald Reagan, 52 votes. And 4 votes for John Anderson. Right now, what we can say from our straw poll here is it's going to be a very, very tight race in Palo Alto County when it comes to voting for a president. Okay, I guess I'll wrap this up by asking each of you your opinion on this one final question, and that is, do you feel Palo Alto County will continue with their bellwether status? Ed?
I hope so.
Like those people in Palo Alto County, Iowa, a lot of us are still trying to make up our minds how to vote for president. But millions of others have already decided not to vote at all. Voter turnout in presidential elections peaked in 1960 and has been declining ever since. Not voting is, well, it's not simple. For some, particularly the young, the poor, and the uneducated, it registers passivity and alienation from the system. For others, it's an action with a message of protest. I reject the choice, they are saying, or as one of our guests said here not long ago, you do not have my consent to govern. To vote or not to vote, that is the question I will put to 2 friends of mine. Lucy Wilson Benson is former Undersecretary of State and former National President of the League of Women Voters. Ted Becker is Professor of Political Science at the University of Hawaii and a co-founder of the Community Mediation Services at the university. In his book titled Unvote for a New America, Ted Becker advocates not voting. Why?
Well, actually, Bill, I don't truly advocate non-voting, even though I personally have come to be a non-voter in presidential elections. What I'm doing is really addressing my remarks to people who have decided not to vote and who feel a sense of guilt or that they failed in some citizen's obligation. And what I'm trying to do in that book, among other things, 2 things. The first, I'm trying to tell them not to feel this because voting's a right, not a duty, and that it's something to spend in a fashion that they consider to be wise. And if they feel that it is not wise to vote, they shouldn't spend it, and should feel the same way, that there's just not anything worth spending their vote on. It's a perfectly legitimate and valuable action of a person in a Republican system where you're voting for candidates.
Are you voting for president this year?
No, I'm not voting this year. I didn't vote the last time either.
Why?
Well, all right, because I felt that there was no significant difference between the candidates. They would both lead us to pretty much where we are right now. And I feel pretty much the same way about the candidates presently the major candidates. I feel that they will not make much of a difference.
Are you voting this year, Lucy?
Yes, I am indeed voting this year.
Do you agree with Ted?
No, I don't. But I do agree with one thing. I don't think people should feel guilty. I think we have an irresistible tendency in this country to try to make people feel guilty, to hold a hammer over their head and say, it's your duty to do thus and such, and if you don't, you're bad, bad, bad. And I think that's very silly.
But you do feel we should vote?
I feel you should vote.
Even if you don't like the candidate?
Even if you don't like the candidates, I think you should vote. Somebody said a few weeks ago in a previous program that you do not have my consent to government. Well, my answer is, so what? If our form of government is based on the consent of the governed, and if someone decides they don't want to give their consent, that's fine, but I'd like to know what good they think it does them. And I think that that in our form of government, which somebody once said democracy is not a spectator sport, it's a participatory occupation. In our form of government, I think that citizens should try to make up their minds. There is a difference between the two candidates, or between the two candidates plus the minor party candidates.
But he says there isn't. You say there is.
I know, but there is a difference. There is a difference between people, no matter how. There is nobody in this world who's exactly the same, or who thinks exactly the same, or who will react in a crisis exactly the same, or who uses the same criteria by which to make judgments. There are differences between the candidates, and I think that people ought to decide, even though it's unpleasant. Nobody ever said democracy was supposed to be fun. Certainly nobody ever said it was supposed to be easy. And I think you should make your choice and go vote and hope that you turned out to be right. Now, I've done an awful lot of voting in my life, and there have been some candidates I voted for, and I'm sorry I did, but I'm not running around crying over it, you know.
Well, I feel that certainly that's a position that people do take. My own feeling is that, first, actually, there's no significant difference. I guess I would say that. There are always differences between people, but when you get to the point of, as some people are saying, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, or Tweedledum, Tweedledum, or Tweedledum, Tweedledummer, and you don't really, there isn't much of a choice for you to actually go out and make. And if you're at that point, or even worse, if you feel that you're voting for the lesser of two evils, as a lot of people are doing, or I'm voting against Reagan or against Carter, even though I know that if I vote for those people, they're going to do a lot of things I don't like, bring about more inflation, bring us closer to war, the responsible voter in that particular case would not vote. In other words,
it's going to happen anyway.
That's right. But
what do you mean, what's going to happen?
Well, I mean, if you vote for X or Y, it's going to bring about more inflation. If you don't vote for X and Y, it's the same thing is still going to happen, presuming that it's going to happen.
That's correct. I see.
But if you don't vote, you give up your right to make a decision. And it is true, it is a right. I agree with you on that. If you want to give up your right, well, go ahead and give up your right. But I don't know what it gains you to give up your right.
Okay, what I would suggest is in terms of the gain, as I was saying to you, that there's another aspect to unvote. I'm not just saying that you should give up a right and not vote and become the apathetic voter, one who doesn't care anymore. I think that most of the people do care anyway. I mean, they do have interest, and they have thought about it a lot, and come to the decision not to vote. But just leaving it at that, I think, is a mistake. The other aspect of what I mean by unvote is to participate in government yourself.
How?
Well, there are a lot of ways in which people can participate without voting for candidates and politicians who they don't trust anymore. I think there are a number of movements in this country that are community-based, frequently issue-oriented kinds of movements. Like, for instance, as you had earlier in the show, talking about the record number of initiatives and referenda that are being voted on in the country today. I think that's a very positive, very direct kind of democracy that this country was founded upon, and is the basis of
our country was not founded on, on direct democracy. And although there is a role for the initiative and the referendum, that is not the same as representative government, which is what this country was founded on, was a representative form of government by which you elect people to represent you at the various levels of government, local government, state government, national government. And you really cannot run a government on initiative and referendum as as if you were the people of Athens in the year whatever 1000 BC it was. That is just not satisfactory. It's not even possible for a complicated country like ours, or even much smaller countries, to make the decisions.
You would not accept Ted's position that simply voting at local elections, or taking part at the local level is a substitute for voting for a president?
No, I don't see how it can possibly be. If we're going to have a president, unless we have a parliamentary form of government where your president is a prime minister and arises out of a different kind of election, that's one thing, and that's a perfectly good argument. People have made an argument for a parliamentary form of government, fine. But we don't have that form of government at the present time. We have a presidential form of government. As long as we have this form of government, if you don't vote, you've given up your right to make a determination, which is your right to do if you want to. If you do vote, however, you have struck a vote for freedom, I believe, and for liberty, and for a form of government which, though it may not work well, and though you may not like the candidates, nevertheless works pretty well. And after all, these are very trying times. There are many large problems to deal with. If people think that if they're going to vote for X, everything is going to be perfect, or we're going to have peace, or we're not going to have inflation, then X doesn't manage to bring about peace, or in fact even gets us into a war. The point is, did he try as hard as he could to avoid getting us into a war?
Certainly democracy is a key theme in our form of government. I feel that even though the people are in the position where they have to spend the vote or not vote, spend the vote on a person that they don't have much faith and trust in, or not vote, that it's better for them not to take the responsibility by voting for someone they really don't care for. As for doing something positive, I feel that it's essential that the people who do not vote realize they can make a difference in their local communities in all kinds of areas, including energy, etc., and that this is the way in which they should be spending their time, not paying attention to candidates they don't care for.
It doesn't matter whether you care for the candidate or not. It's who do you think will best represent you and make the choices that have to be made. Whose judgment do you put the most stock in, one or the other?
Thank you, Lucy Benson. Thanks, Ted Decker. It's true that when millions vote, it's hard to see how one vote affects the outcome. Yet some elections have been decided by such a narrow margin that a few votes one way or the other could have changed the results and history too. Look at what happened in 1844 when Henry Clay, the man who would rather have been right than president, almost was both. He wasn't sure he wanted Texas in the Union. His opponent, James Polk, was. The difference between them was just 4,000 votes in 4 states. Polk won, the Union got Texas, and we've never been the same for it. More recently, there was the Kennedy-Nixon cliffhanger of 1960. Fewer than 10,000 votes the other way in key precincts would have elected Nixon instead of Kennedy. The mind boggles at the thought of what might have been. 4 years later, Lyndon Johnson trounced Barry Goldwater by 16 million votes. But LBJ's road to the presidency began in 1948 when he was elected senator from Texas by 87 questionable votes. Landslide Lyndon, they called him. But suppose his opponent had trumped Johnson with another 88 votes dug up somewhere. Who would have been Kennedy's running mate in 1960 and president in 1964? And how would he have handled the best and the brightest? Or take that close one in 1968 when a renascent Nixon rose from the ashes to win a plurality of 500,000 votes. It would have taken only 100,000 votes in 4 states to keep Henry Kissinger at Harvard and spare us Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Liddy, and Dean. And what about 4 years ago when Jimmy Carter topped incumbent Gerald Ford? History says he won by almost 4 million votes. But had only 7,475 voters in 2 states changed from Carter to Ford, the Electoral College would have gone to Ford. How different our choices might be tomorrow. We could go on spinning conjecture, but if it didn't make a difference to the outcome of an election, well, have you ever heard a politician ask us not to vote for him? There are almost no secrets left about this campaign, except how it will end and what kind of president the winner will be. I'm willing to wager that no matter who wins, the Before the next year is out, most of his supporters will feel he's anything but the sort of president they deserve. By Election Day, the candidates have had to promise so many things to so many people that they have mortgaged the White House. To win the endorsement of the Maritime Union and the Teamsters, for example, Reagan has had to promise big subsidies to the one and to the other a retreat from his support of competition in the trucking industry. Carter is in deep hock to the National Education Association, whose teachers expect billions in exchange for their enormous support of the president. Anderson has his own obligations. That's politics, you say, and so it is. But by the time a president reaches the White House, he's hardly an original anymore, and there's little he can do except rearrange the deck chairs for a different set of passengers. I was struck this week by what a New York cab driver named Marguerite Cooner said to me in one of those instant polls we journalists are always taking while the meter ticks. Said Mrs. Cooner, "I used to be a registered member of the Conservative Party in New York and should be for Reagan, but I don't like his extreme opposition to abortion and the Equal Rights Amendment. Jimmy Carter's made good appointments to the courts, but if I vote for him, I'm ratifying his terrible record on the economy. As for John Anderson, his 50-cent tax on gasoline strikes right at my livelihood. I'll tell you, Mr. Moyers, sometimes I think we ought to hang a sign on our political system that says, 'Not in working order.'" Well, on Bernard Baruch's old park bench across from the White House, I heard something like that from a reformed lawyer, repentant politician, and ex-government official gone straight named Charlie Peters. For 10 years, Peters has edited an influential little magazine called the Washington Monthly. Now he's written a book called How Washington Really Works.
Well, I think, Bill, the problem is we have got a government that is now substantially run by the lobbies, by the permanent bureaucracy. Remember, 99% civil service, tenured civil service. And so the lobbies, the civil service, and the courts are the power, the continuing power. And whoever is elected president, unless he is really a great man, or unless he's an evil man, really doesn't make that much difference.
Great or evil? Those seem...
What I mean is that would make a difference. A great man would make a difference, and an evil man would make a difference. But men who are neither, like Carter, Reagan, Anderson, I don't think are going to make that much difference because there is this permanent government.
Permanent government. Describe it for me.
Well, I think it has these elements, and what you find the common thing of these people is that they are not responsive. They are not accountable people. The bureaucrat can't be fired. The civil servant can't be fired. The judge is on a life appointment. The lobbyist is here independent. He's paid by his company or by the interest group he's representing.
In other words, they are unaffected by the election returns.
They are unaccountable to the people, unaffected by the election returns, unresponsive to the election returns.
Is it possible, more or less mathematically, to define how much of an influence a president has? I mean, can he affect 10% of what happens in this town, 20% of what happens, 30%, or so on?
I think it's in the 10% area.
That's all?
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem?
That's part of the problem.
If the proof of the pudding in American politics has to do not with good intentions, which both Carter and Reagan have, but with results, real changes in the lives of people out there, how would you judge the pudding?
I don't think they're having a substantial effect on the main problems facing the country. The problems of health care, of jobs, one of the really crushing problems that's confronting this country in the coming years is what is called the income maintenance problem, but it's readily recognizable as Social Security as we get more and more old people. The other forms are unemployment compensation, veterans' pensions. But anyway, sometime in the 1990s, these programs just continued at their present rate will bankrupt the government. So somebody has to take the lead and help the public face the problem, examine all the facts, and let the people decide what needs to be done.
By your own definition of the way the system works, Washington cannot or will not cope with those real issues.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And that's why we've got to change the system. What I call the fundamental equation and the key to understanding the anthropology of Washington is the equation make-believe equals survival.
Make-believe
equals survival. In other words, people come here because they want some kind of office, not because they really want to do something. In order to stay here, they find out the way to stay here is to pretend to do something about the problems. And if they, of course, they figure out if they really, it doesn't take them long if you're working at the Department of Energy to figure out if you really do something about the energy problem and it disappears, there's no more Department of Energy and you don't have a job anymore.
Well, that's part of the problem with the bureaucracy, as well as its alliance with Congress. I mean, if a bureaucrat realizes that solving a problem means he's no longer justified, and a member of Congress realizes that if cutting the budget is going to reduce spending in his district, they have a vested interest in not solving that problem and in not cutting that budget.
That's right. That's right.
You've been in Washington 20 years now. You know many people who've ever been fired?
It's something like 1/7 of 1%. It's an incredibly low figure. It translates into a small business into like one firing every 10 years. You can't run anything that way. There always are people who don't do well in any form of endeavor, and you have to be able to get rid of them. And you also have to be able, and this is equally if not more important, you have to be able to hire people who believe in what you do.
People come to Washington and are not held accountable because they don't really have an objective other than staying in office.
They want a job. They want a job. And in a sense, that's happening not just in the civil service, but because of the powerlessness of the elected officials, you have many people running for office because they want a job, a title.
Not because they have a program.
Not because they have a program. Jimmy Carter is probably the most spectacular example of that. We realized soon after he got elected president that he really didn't have a program. He had to figure out, well, what are we going to do next, you know? Many congressmen, I have interviewed congressmen, newly elected congressmen, and asked the question, well, what is it you're going to try to do? And the silence is just crushing. The lame answer will usually be something like, well, I want to restore faith in government, or some answer like that.
But if you had one idea that you could get across about what to do about the stalemate in Washington, what would it be?
In contrast to almost everybody else, I'd give the president more power. I don't think he has enough power. And this is particularly true in the domestic area. Remember, the Founding Fathers did not want a government that was capable of a lot of action. The Founding Fathers wanted to sit on their farms and not be bothered by any more people like those British were. They just didn't want that. So they constructed a government that was cleverly designed to frustrate action, the adversary system between the Congress, the press, and the courts. If we want action, we have got to think about some redesign of that system that was ideal for the purposes of the Founding Fathers, but is not ideal for us.
You're running counter to the liberal opinion that a strong presidency gave us Vietnam and Watergate.
I think that depends on who you elect president. You've got to care about, the electorate has to get the right men elected. You have to do that. But you can't base a system on the fact that you're going to continually make the wrong mistakes at the polls. You've got to create a system that is going to attract the best people and elect the best people.
And that's more politics, not less.
That's more politics, a lot more politics. Clean politics.
If self-interest is the animating principle of Washington, as you suggest it is in your book, then isn't what's wrong with Washington what's wrong with all of us?
I think that is exactly true. Because remember, the power of the lobbies is based on the fact that at least some of the people out there watching this program are members of each one of those lobbies. That's where they get their power, the single-issue lobby. And so if you have to begin to be willing to give up your little secret. Like, take me. If we're going to face this income maintenance problem, I'm going to have to give up that veterans pension I get that I don't have to have. But I take it now. I'm not going to be the one who marches down to the Veterans Administration and says, look, I'll take this back. I'm not going to do that alone. I'm not going to get my Aunt Alice to come back from Europe and hand over that Social Security she doesn't need. Not alone. But if we all decide together, look, if we're going to solve that problems, we've got to give up some. We aren't going to get those doctors to give up their high fees unless we're all doing part of the same thing. We're all making some gesture together. I think people have a sense that something is badly wrong in Washington, and I think that's why they were attracted to Carter in 1976, because it seemed like he was running against Washington, and they liked that. when he got here, unfortunately, he didn't do much about what was wrong with Washington. When Reagan, I think Reagan now is the beneficiary of the anti-Washington sentiment. And he, I think, will turn out to do just as little as Carter.
Because of the way Washington works.
Because of the power, even now. Now, you would think that Ronald Reagan would be the man who was going to do something about a conservative like Ronald Reagan doing something about the civil service and the power of the civil service. Just the other day, Reagan endorsed the most outrageous scandal, which is the twice-a-year cost of living increase that is one of the most inflationary facts of the government, but it is the government employees' lobby. It is their #1 cause. And here, Reagan, the supposed conservative, has already caved in on that issue. He's not even president yet, and he's already caved.
Since when do politicians get elected? By asking people to sacrifice?
Oh, I think they would get elected. I think people hunger for somebody who would tell them the truth. They hunger for somebody who would take that kind of leadership. And I think that kind of leader would sweep this country.
Maybe. But that isn't our choice tomorrow. The choice is between three more conventional politicians, not one of whom offers the hope of putting together a governing coalition that can act on a broad program of social policies, between them and minority parties which, for all their enthusiasms, have not yet excited the public imagination. In a way, this election is symbolic of the country's predicament. You can be philosophic and say we're only getting what we deserve, that Americans don't really wish to be led until things collapse and there's no alternative to leadership. Or you can be idealistic and say that we're simply determined to prove the founders correct when they said that men can do better without kings and nobles than with them, although that would suffice only if sufficient numbers of us were actually engaged where we live in the civic duties of our time. Or you can be realistic and say, as it's often been said, that great men are not chosen president because great men are rare in politics, as they are in life. It's a rule almost without exception, said a Protestant divine to his congregation years ago, that men and women do not live by our first choices. We live by our second and third choices. So when we enter the voting booth tomorrow, we will find what most of us find at times in love and marriage, in the rearing of children, in work, in the whole journey from cradle to grave. We will find the string from popped balloons. That may not be enough to stay the powers that make the course of this republic now so precarious, and one can only hope Charlie Peters' faith might soon be vindicated. But for the next 4 years, the string is all we've got, and the test is what we make of it. Good luck tomorrow. I'm Bill Moyers.
Later tonight, an in-depth look at the strengths and weaknesses of the two major presidential candidates, the essential Carter and the essential Reagan, on Bill Moyers' campaign report. Important election viewing from 13 tonight at 11:40, and on Friday night, Bill Moyers files a post-election report. That's Friday night at 9 o'clock. Now Dick Cavett, Anthony Lewis, and Jane Bryant Quinn discuss Election 80, next on 13.
For a transcript of this program, send $2 to Bill Moyers Journal Campaign Report, Box 900, New York, New York, 10101. Please include the date of broadcast with your request. Funding for this program has been provided by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Song of the Canary, a look at occupational hazards in the petrochemical and textile industries, Wednesday at 9.
This year, the race for president and other contests for the Senate and House of Representatives are close and complicated. Channel 13 will be here, live, November 4th, with the latest on the national and local political scene. For comprehensive analysis of the 1980 campaign and election returns, join me, Dick Leone, with Lee Denbart and Kathleen Campion for complete election night coverage.
Live coverage of all important tri-state and national races tomorrow night at 9. The Essential Carter, The Essential Reagan, tonight at 11:40, here on 13.
Funding for the following program has been provided by this station and other public television stations, and by a grant from the Chubb Group of Insurance Companies.